In my experience, the most important thing is that one should listen to what others have to say. But of course, you have to also decide who you want to listen to. And the best way to ensure that you're well informed and you make the right decisions, but also that you can actually execute them, is to have the best people working for you, immediately underneath you and further down. And never, ever, ever worry that those people might want to take your job, because you will succeed because they will succeed, and they will succeed because you've put faith in them. And I think that is a win-win, which one always must remember through life. I'm seriously interested in my subject. I remember thinking when I was younger that actually I wasn't particularly good at many things. I was good at sport, I was good at maths, and I liked to think about, if I did this, what would happen, which actually economics gives you. I didn't really want to write long essays or think about ancient Greek or anything like that. And I found maths and economics to be absolutely right for me. And the good thing about it is, because I was limited in a way, because I really liked these things and really didn't like the rest, my path was quite clear. I was going to be an economist, even though I didn't quite know what it meant at the end of the day. And I haven't really wavered from that, but what I do find is that you've got to reinvent yourself constantly, and you've got to survive anything that comes your way. And as a woman, in particular, I had this very strong belief that we're just as good as men, if not better. Of course, I shouldn't say that, because of course there are some very, very good men who are considerably better than I am, but overall, and I've written quite a lot about this, and that for a woman in particular, for anyone who wants to make it in life, you have to be independent. You have to use your resources and succeed wherever you go. And for me in particular, I came from Greece at the age of 17, knew nobody here, but I had an absolute conviction that I could make it nevertheless. And I think that's what you need to do if you're a young student thinking ahead. A belief that you can do it is, I think, what gets you there. You have to realize that you have to learn continuously. There are different things happening all around you, but also don't worry at all about entering a new field. Of course, using your expertise and the way you analyze things. Being an economist means you look at evidence. You need to understand, if A, then B, possibly. And then if C, then everything changes again. But you've got to understand how the system works, and you've got to learn about new areas that are developing. In economics, for example, behavioral economics is a really important one. But also, you've got to be really humble in the sense that you don't know everything. And therefore, you need to learn more. You need to listen to people who have the greater expertise. You have to give them credit for having that expertise, but you widen your horizons constantly. And you certainly should never be scared about going into an area that you know nothing about, but where things open up for you, where you can use that expertise into anything else you do. So basically, never stop learning, never stop going to lectures, never stop networking, never stop reading a new book, however much you disagree with it. And what is really wonderful, I find, is picking holes in things that perhaps you don't agree with, but also finding the things that you like and the things that you can reuse, and the way in which you can really enrich yourself through learning, reading, talking to people constantly. And a lot of that actually comes from people who work with you, people who work around you. So listening is essential, in my view. It is extraordinary, actually, when it comes to economics in particular. The truth is that everyone can be an economist because they read the papers. So you have to read the papers as well. You have to be one step ahead. And you have to really decide whether the interpretation that's given on some data that's just come out is correct, or whether it can change, or whether it just gives you pause for thought. Is this right? Is this not? Then you investigate a bit more. So I would say that, in fact, maybe 50% of your time is spent learning, because there's no way that anything is static in this world. And economics, I think, gives you that. And the good thing, going back to where I started thinking about what career I'd have, what I really liked about economics is that anything goes. You can interpret things in certain ways. The thing, of course, is to interpret them correctly if you can. We are very often wrong. There's no doubt about it. We miss recessions. We look at data that we can't necessarily rely on, and they get revised suddenly. You have politicians who just act irrationally, and everything you predicted just is thrown out of the window, and suddenly we vote for Brexit when nobody expected that. So how do you put that in a model, since it's never happened before? So all that is good news for economists in a way, but it can be also incredibly frustrating for someone in my profession. Yes, I had a professor in Greece where I grew up who, when I decided I'd do economics probably, or maths, and somebody started talking about economics as a possibility. I was in a German school in Greece, intending to go and study in Germany. And then I came to the UK one summer, and I changed my mind. I was definitely going to come here. And what do? The only place I knew was the London School of Economics. And since I was good at maths, somebody said, why don't you do economic A-level? So we found this professor who had in fact been sacked by the dictatorship in Greece, which was there at the time when I was a schoolgirl, and who taught me economics. And it was quite an extraordinary finding, really, for me to be taught by somebody absolutely wonderful. And so that was really what inspired me, and I applied to go to the LSE, and eventually I did it after another year of A-levels here. But the most extraordinary thing, and the most extraordinary story about this particular person, is that just as I finished doing my studies with him, and I was about to come to the UK, he was caught, or rather, he lost his hand because he was manufacturing a bomb in his basement in protest against the dictatorship. And it turns out that I was having all my economics lessons above a bomb factory. And for me, this was extraordinary. I mean, he was sentenced to death, but they didn't commute the sentence in the end. And then he came out and became a very famous professor again, but with a few fingers missing from his hand. But for me, I was going to be an economist. I thought this guy was amazing. The first thing to say is that I don't care which university they've come from. And I have recruited loads of people in my time. And I was responsible, as you know, for 1,500 economists in government. And also in the private sector too, when I was recruiting quite a lot of people. So where you come from is not an issue. Where you've gone to school, what you've done. But of course you have to have done reasonably well. But the most important thing for me is that people should be aware of what's going on around them. So if you ask them a question about why is inflation so high or so low, and what can the government do about this, I don't want a big mathematical answer. I want them to be savvy. I want them to be able to explain it. I want them to therefore, they may be wrong slightly, but it doesn't matter, but they have to give me a convincing answer. And if they don't, if they can't, then if I ask a question, but what if, surely things would be slightly different, if they can't actually think out of the box in a way, then they don't get a job. I would have said, if anything, network more and say yes if anyone offers you a job, any job that is even vaguely related to what you've studied. Take it, because that's a way, it's a step, if you like, for going to where you may want to end up. Don't look for your ideal job. Just prove that you can do it, and if you are really determined, you'll shine. I think universities are absolutely essential in ensuring that we have the right skills in this country. When you look at what's happening across the UK, it's interesting that if you look at regional productivity levels and regional gross value added, the places which have the highest gross value added are the ones with loads of graduates, where graduates stay and contribute to the economy. It doesn't matter what they've done. It is really extraordinary that you can see this link very, very clearly. And of course, what universities also do is they encourage inward investment in R&D and all sorts of other areas as well. And we are in the UK, because we have such an important and well-respected university sector, we are the place which attracts the highest percentage of footloose R&D. They may not, in fact, those companies that come necessarily produce here, but they do an awful lot in terms of expanding horizons and starting up things, which then encourage others to do various things as well. So productivity improves quite significantly as a result. Startups, thinking again out of the box, thinking innovatively, and encouraging that type of innovation, which is so essential in this country. I think universities are absolutely essential in helping achieve that. It is wonderful that people go out and do that students spend time doing things for which they don't get paid and which don't necessarily add to their work, but what they do is they widen their horizons and they give them all sorts of interpersonal skills which are absolutely essential to ensure that they succeed later. But giving something to the community is a must. And I think people should do that throughout their life, not just for a bit so that they can get a bit of experience, but that should be part of learning, continuous learning and continuous giving, which I think is absolutely essential. We don't need to do it with an awful lot of sort of cash, but we can do it through time and help and advice. And of course, you become a much better lawyer. For example, if you have been doing that in the community and you understand what people's needs are, what the issues are, you understand the social environment in which they live and the pressures they're under. Because eventually one may end up in a sort of ivory tower where the links with the real people just disappears, and yet that really allows you to do that. But there is a really important other aspect, which is the help that you actually give can be very, very substantial and can help people, communities, social enterprises that exist out there do a huge amount of work. What we do in pro bono economics is that we provide free service, so economists get involved in evaluating in particular, looking at the cost benefit of particular things that charities do. And I think we mustn't forget that charities substitute for a lot of what government should be doing but isn't doing. And if we didn't have the charities, I don't know what we'd be doing. But of course, a lot of what they do requires extra funding from sometimes the government, sometimes other organizations. And what they need to do is prove that they're contributing. And that what they do has a positive cost benefit. In other words, that the benefit is higher than the cost. And often they haven't got any money or any ability to do the evaluation of what they do. But government doesn't do much evaluation. So economists go and look at what they've done, calculate the impact, ask people at the other end, and on the basis of that, they can produce something which is accepted by the government and other funders and guarantee some funding for those organizations, which just wouldn't happen otherwise. Instead, you get a tax. So, for example, doing theatre sessions in prisons, for example. But if you look at the impact that has on behavior and what people do later and reoffending rates, it's absolutely extraordinary. So without that type of evidence, you don't get there. So it's not just enhancing, you and your abilities if you go out and do various things. We must realize that it also has a very important impact on the organization you work with, on the people who depend on it, and frankly, on the future welfare of the UK. I think it's a very uncertain period, without any doubt. We've already heard about collaborative projects being pulled, or at least some of the researchers in other countries not really wanting to work with the researchers here because they're concerned about whether all this will continue. It is extraordinary, of course, that the UK has tended to receive such a big sort of chunk of all the European funding that's out there. It's also amazing when you heard the Vice-Chancellor of Oxford when they came first in the league table, international league table of universities. I've been at the LSE, so I'm not necessarily convinced it's the right league table, but nevertheless, they came first on that one. The Vice-Chancellor came on the radio, and the first thing she said was, it's great that we are, of course, at the top, but it's all due to European research funding. So what should universities do? But obviously they need to lobby. I'm afraid they need to all get together and speak with one voice. One has to worry a little bit about whether perhaps some universities might be able to keep some of the research funding and others won't. The government has already said it would do what it can in the short term, but remember, for every £1 that the UK is putting into the research funds in Europe, we get 1.4 back because we are rather good. We get about 22%, I think, of all the research money coming through. So collaborative research is so important. Horizon 2020, really significant, 80 billion euros, which we get a big share of. Really, really difficult to see how you can replace that if we leave. But of course, all universities try and get more business funding, and we see that they're moving a bit like what's happening in the US, but there is a limit to how much of that you do. So I would imagine that what universities need to do is just talk to government as closely as they can and see what can be salvaged.